Hello and welcome to the CI Immersion podcast. This is episode number 3. My name is Andrew Snyder and I am the host of the CI Immersion podcast. CI Immersion is my complete language teaching system. It is proficiency driven, it is comprehension based. I love this system for teaching languages, and it is really a set of subsystems that together create an acquisition engine. Now, this podcast is coming to you in the Listen, Read, Interact feed, as well as the CI Immersion feed. And so, if you're a learner, this may not be the most interesting thing for you because it's aimed at teachers. CI Immersion is aimed at language instructors. Similarly, Listen, Read, Interact, my other podcast for Spanish learners, is aimed at learners. Now, I put them both together in the same feed because I think there are some elements of CI Immersion that might be interesting to learners. And there are lots of things in the Listen, Read, Interact feed that will be of interest to instructors. Each episode of Listen, Read, Interact is a self-contained lesson, and often there's 3 or 4 stories that go together that make a nice story sequence, and so it might save you a lot of time as an instructor, and to see the kinds of activities that I might include in a class that I teach. If you're interested in just CI Immersion, you can follow just this feed, and you'll only get CI Immersion episodes, which come out sporadically at the moment because I have a number of things that I'm doing, a lot of irons in the fire, and so I want to make sure I can dedicate the time to make each episode worth your while. And you can follow the CI Immersion podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on YouTube. Those are the 3 places right now. If you take a minute and subscribe to the channels, that would be very, very helpful going forward. That's just a big help. So I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe. If you find it interesting, you listen along, you like it, please give us a follow in that regard. Hey, perfect. What is CI Immersion then? As I said, it's this subsystem, the set of subsystems that together build an acquisition engine. We want to have this engine purring along so that we're in class and students are acquiring language just because they're active and participating in the class. And this system is largely storytelling based, but it's not just storytelling. CI Immersion has a storytelling element to it because we're storytelling creatures. I love telling stories. I love listening to stories. I love getting captured by a story. And so I try to do that in my classroom. But there are really 6 phases to this. Now, there is phase 1, which is the first steps, which we'll talk about in a moment. That's the focus of today's episode, is the first steps phase. There is the pre-story phase, which is phase 2. Phase 3 is the storytelling. Phase 4 is reading a story and maybe writing a version of the story as well. Stage 5 is guiding learners from input to output, and phase 6 is assessment. So I have a feeling that when I get to that assessment episode, people are really going to love that. And I think it's going to be probably the most popular episode because I noticed that not a lot of people are talking about assessment out there. And we'll get there, but that will be on another episode, phase 6. We might touch on it briefly today, but we'll go a deep dive on that when we get to phase 6. That is correct. Okay, so we're going to focus on that first phase, the first steps phase. And the core principle, really the tenet, I have lots of tenets. I like to say, this is a tenet because I think that's a funny word and an interesting word. So I got some tenets, some core principles. And one of the main ones for phase 1 is to front load the work. Now, this first steps phase is actually a behind the scenes phase. You're going to do a lot of work prior to ever setting foot in the classroom with students. And so the purpose of this front load phase, this first steps phase, is to prevent disorganization, to prevent burnout later on. We want to reduce task creep, which is that idea that you set up with a small task, and then, oh, that would be nice. You have all these would be nice features that you want to add to that task, and the task grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. It's a real problem. It's a problem in my life in general. I'm very susceptible to task creep. And so this is a way to help reduce that. You want to avoid administrative overload during teaching, and you want to free your mental bandwidth for listening, reading, and interaction for when you actually get into the classroom. And so the key idea here is, in this whole phase, is that you want to build systems early so that when you get into the classroom, the acquisition engine is purring along, it's humming along, it runs smoothly without any engine knock, as it were. So a big thing that you can do early on to reduce that task creep, to prevent burnout, to prevent disorganization, to reduce your administrative overload, is to define your scope and sequence. Define your scope and sequence. Hey, that's why you know I'm not AI, is when I say things like define your scope and sequence. I can't even talk. Define your scope and sequence. And so before the term begins, you have to define this. You have to define what it is that you're going to teach and in what order you're going to teach it. And so you may have to define learning outcomes. You may already have those defined for you. Now, in my case, since I teach at the college, we define these learning outcomes every so often. They go through a whole bureaucratic nightmare of trying to get them adopted, and then finally they get adopted. It's terrible. I can't stand it. I got to be honest. That's one thing I don't like about the college level, is just the insane bureaucracy that I have to deal with. So if you're at a high school, you may have some bureaucracy as well. I imagine it's not to the level of a college. There's a whole layer or 5 layers of bureaucracy. And it's like, oh, it's just got to go to committee and all this stuff. So now, that's neither here nor there. So learning outcomes, you got to define those. Or maybe you haven't defined already. Define your scope and sequence. Your scope and sequence, what it is you're going to teach, and in what order. And maybe you want to decide what you aren't going to teach too, because often we can over-define our scope. And so maybe it's helpful to limit what it is that you're going to teach in that way. Say, hey, with intention, with deliberation, do this very deliberately, limit what you're going to teach. And so, for example, I might want to be teaching about weather. I'm going to teach weather expressions. Well, there's a ton of weather expressions, and I want to cover a lot of them. I really do. And so maybe I will cover a lot of them, but intentionally limit the explicit ones that I'm going to teach. So I'm going to say I'm going to teach 8 essential weather expressions. There will be others that appear here and there that learners will hear and will see in context, but perhaps the ones that go on the test are going to be limited to 8 or something like that. Let's say that you're teaching the date. You then will need some specific items, won't you? You'll need days of the week. You'll need numbers 1 through 31. I'll probably throw the number 0 in there while I'm at it, since it's really easy to teach by counting numbers. And so just start with 0, and hey, you got 0 in there. You'll need months. Obviously, if you're going to tell the date, you'll need to say what month it is. And you'll probably need some years, maybe. But maybe you want to limit that for another lesson. Maybe once you get numbers over 1,000, then you'll be able to say, okay, now we're going to add the year in there intentionally. Or maybe you'll just add this year, and that way students will know how to say what year it is right now, and that could be useful as well. So language is infinite, right? You can put any number of words together in any number of combinations, and it really is infinite. It can go on and on and on forever. And so you have to limit the curriculum intentionally. You have to say, this is going to be my scope, and I'm not going to go beyond my scope. And by doing that, you're really freeing yourself up. It's a limit. It's an artificial limit, but it's one of those things where learners are going to not be overwhelmed, and you'll let them start to develop their language system in a way that makes sense. So limit vocabulary as much as you can. And while still being able to complete the tasks that you need to do. So the tasks that you have them do define what that vocabulary should be. So like again, if I'm doing the date, you'll need the days of the week, and you'll need numbers 0 through 31, and you'll need the months and possibly the current year or how to say years as well. So, but limit that, Limit that as much as you can, and learners will be able to complete the tasks that you're asking them to complete. Another really good thing to do is, since CI Immersion is storytelling based, there's a lot of story that's involved in this, and that's kind of the focal point of CI Immersion. You want to pre-select your stories and the vocabulary that you're going to target in those stories. So, for example, I will have a story script, or I teach in quarters, and so every quarter I teach 4 stories. I used to teach 6, I used to teach 8, and over the years it's been reduced and reduced and reduced and reduced, and we just go deep on the 4 stories. And there's lots of other things that I can now introduce as well into my teaching that make the story it's not a one-trick pony anymore. When I was a one-trick pony in the CI world, then it was just storytelling all the time, and I enjoyed that, but I feel like I've found a balance that's even better. And so now I'm down to 4 stories, and before the term begins, I will select what those 4 stories will be. Now, we'll see when we get to that storytelling phase, the story that we end up with for each class is going to be different than the story that I've selected, but I know more or less at least one possible way the story will go. I might have even have taught this before, and so maybe I'll have several versions of a story that target that vocabulary that I want to pick. And I will pick 6 phrases that go along with that story, that come from the story. And if they can get those 6 phrases, then they're going to have a pretty good idea of how to tell that story. Those 6 phrases are like essential phrases. They can be single words, but often, especially at the lower levels, I like to pick chunks, because chunking language is super efficient, and learners can pick up chunks of language just as fast as they can pick up single words, and the chunks of language will help them later as they're trying to figure out these systems. Chunking is a really good thing. So I will pick 6 language chunks, sometimes one word, but often chunks instead of isolated words. And I will prepare these slides ahead of time. So I'm front loading my work before the term begins, so that when the term gets there, I have 4 stories picked. I have these vocabulary items already picked. And if I do a good job of that before the term begins, guess what? I get to recycle that the next quarter. So the next quarter, I teach Spanish 1 again. I've already got my 4 stories picked. I've already got my slides made. Sometimes I'll improve them. Like this quarter, I'm targeting Spanish 2 as a course to improve. And I haven't done this iteration for a while, and so I've intentionally picked Spanish 2 to be my course that I'm going to target to improve various items. I'm calling it my Spanish 2 Redux. And it's a wonderful thing to do something like that, but often I'll be able to just recycle. And that's key, because being able to recycle your stuff frees you up to do other things, to improve other areas of your course. Now, I'm always tinkering. The CI Immersion system is always evolving. It's always changing. It's always getting better. And the way that I do that is by recycling stuff that's working well. I don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel every single quarter, and so having these things pre-selected once often will make your life much easier for quarters or terms or years to come. And my Spanish 1 story phrases have been around for 4 years, I think, now. And they're probably due for a refresh. But this quarter, I'm not doing Spanish 1. I'm doing Spanish 2, which had been around for 4 or 5 years, 6 years. So I'm getting a lot of juice out of this fruit. All right. I'm squeezing it, and I'm getting a lot of juice out of the orange that is my recycled content. Another thing that you can do in this first steps phase, this behind the scenes phase, phase 1 of the CI Immersion system, is to build structural systems. So, for example, you can set up your learning management system And I use Canvas in my classroom. I really like Canvas. It is a good one, actually. Every learning management system has its flaws, its pros and cons. So I'm not going to say it's perfect, but it works really well for what I need it for. And so before the term, I set up assignments. I do my assignments all through Canvas. I have readings and I have at-home grammar exercises that students go through. Now, the grammar exercises are comprehension-based, most of them, and so we can talk about that later when we get to assessments, perhaps. But that's what I do. I have homework assignments on there. I have I've written a rough draft of a textbook, and that goes onto Canvas, and learners get that, as well as a paper copy that I hand out in class. There's some other things that go on here. Obviously, communication is big. There's announcements and things that can go out there. I can schedule some announcements ahead of time that I know I'm going to have. Like, I have an extra credit announcement that goes out partway through the term, and that's scheduled, and I don't have to think about it. It just goes out to people. And I configure grading rules, too. So, like, if I have different categories, I can decide to drop certain assignments from those categories, and that reduces friction later. It really does free me up to think more about the teaching and being present with learners. It's all about being present with learners, and anything you can do to front load your effort will reduce that effort later in the quarter. It'll pay off big time for you. It makes it way more fun when all this boring stuff is taken care of ahead of time. Another structural system that I like to implement is a calendar system. And I create my own, even if the school provides me one. My school does not provide me one in this case, but I create my own. I just use it in Microsoft Word. And I will set, I teach in quarters, and so I have 10, 11 weeks with learners, and I have certain days that are off that this college has scheduled off, like President's Day we just had, and that was an off day. And I will set everything up. And I will put things on this calendar like assignment dates. My assignments are flexible, and they'll be due at a certain time. So let's say I have Chapter 4 assignments. Those are due on March 3rd, let's say. And so you have that date on there. I have some of the things we're going to cover, like we're on Story 1, we're on Story 2, we're in Chapter 1, we're in Chapter 2. I don't do too specific of item on here. I don't say we're going to talk about this specific story this day, because the story can change. But I do say we're on Story 1 or we're on Story 2 right now. And that's kind of a column on the left-hand side that I do. Then on the actual days, I will have things like major checkpoints, off days from school. I'll have essays and quizzes. And then I can go back to this and see my pacing. I can say, okay, we're spending 5 days on Chapter 1. They're block schedules, so it's like 10 classes. If you're at 50-minute classes. Mine are shorter, and mine are often hybrid classes. So there's some hybrid work that students have to do as well. So it's like kind of a whole thing. Essays go on there, in-class essays, quizzes, not the pop quizzes, but the chapter quizzes, as it were. Major assignment dates, assessment dates, yo puedo assignments, which are kind of like I can statement-based assessments that I do, which we'll talk about in assessments. That episode's going to be good. When we get to that assessments one, I think it's going to be popular. And really, I really like this because it shows pacing. It prevents surprises. Students can look at it easily. If I need to change something, I can change on the document camera. I can cross out an assignment, or I can circle it and move it to another date. And it really does anchor my teaching to the assessment. So it's like, okay, I've got to teach. I've got this assessment coming up. I need students to be able to have these skills in order to pass this assessment. And so I can work backwards from there and say, okay, this day I got to do this. This day I got to do this. To go along with that, I often will have lesson plans that I do. And those lesson plans I'll look right at the calendar and say, okay, I've got to have that skill. And so I got to make sure I include that item in my lesson plan. Well, I'll talk more about lesson plans another time. That's a wonderful system as well, a powerful system. It's analog. I don't use a digital anything for my lesson plans. It's all on a sheet of paper, and it's on a small sheet of paper so that it's a quick visual. And I'll talk more about it later, but it's an awesome system. Another thing you can do is design your grading system. So it's very helpful to have the categories that you're going to have in your grading system. And I'll give you mine. I'll put this in the show notes so you can see that. You can find that in the episode description or at listenreadinteract.com on episode number 3 of the CI Immersion podcast. You can click on it and find the show notes there. There's also an episode show notes link in the description for today's episode. So the grading system design is super important, and I try to do 20% for interpersonal communication. I try to do 20% for flexible homework, and those are formative assessments, formative assignments. That's 40% of their grade. Now, you might change the percentages around, and maybe you don't have any homework at all, and so you want to have 40% is interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication for me is like you're present in class mentally and physically. You're there, and you're interacting with the language as requested. So if I ask you to speak, you're speaking. If I ask you to write, you're writing. If I ask you to answer yes or no questions, tick boxes, talk all in Spanish, whatever it is, whatever language you're teaching, talk all in French or German or Portuguese. Whatever the case, that's what interpersonal communication is. You're talking to other people. You're communicating with other people in the language. And whatever level you happen to be at, level appropriate interpersonal communication. That's a big one. We'll talk more about that on the assessments episode. So beyond those formative assessments, I have summative assessments as well. And those are like tests and quizzes and Yo Puedo assignments. And those are broken down to the other 60% of the class. So total we have 100%. And I find this to be a really powerful way of grading the class. People end up in that standard distribution for like actual grades. But if you're there and you do all of the work and you put in the effort, you're going to be in that A range. And so we might even be able to skew toward A little bit, provided that you do all the work. But if you don't, then it's a very fair way of grading as well. And every quarter I look at it and I'm always like, I'm unsure about this. Is this the right weight of the percentages? But then I look at the effort people are putting in class, and I just know, hey, this is perfect. Maybe not perfect. Perfect's the wrong word, but it is right on the money for what it is that I want learners to be able to do. It's perfect in that way. Like learners are getting the grades they deserve based on this, and it really does work out that way. They get the grades they deserve based on the effort they put in and the proficiency that they develop over the quarter. And if they're not developing proficiency, then their grade's going to suffer a little bit. But if they're on the right path towards proficiency, then they're going to be at least in that B range, at least in the C range. I probably Bs. I give mostly Bs and As. I give some Cs, I give some Ds, I give some Fs, because that's just the nature of grading. You have to put a grade on it because that's what the institution requires. But in all honesty, it really does. If you're putting in the effort, Bs and As are mostly what I give because you put in the effort and you've developed the proficiency to the expected level, then you've earned the grade. You've done the work. And this system ahead of time is wonderful to have. It's powerful to have. It's incredible to have. I got to stop saying wonderful. The core idea then is aligning your grade categories with your philosophy. So maybe you have some other ones. Maybe you don't give homework. If you're a high school teacher, I would give homework, but a lot of people don't. And I understand that. I gave a professional development lecture or seminar workshop thing. And I asked, because I was talking about my homework system. And because I have a couple different ones that I've tried over the years. Right now, they're all on Canvas, my learning management. But I've also built my own, and I've used that before, and I really enjoyed it. And I was going to share with people what that was like. And I asked, hey, how many of you give homework? And nobody raised their hand. I'm like, oh, okay, well, we'll skip that bit. Well, I'll talk about it on the podcast at some point. So you want to align the grades with your philosophy, and your grade book should reflect what you value. It should be comprehension, interaction, growth, consistency, all those things that we're looking for. Another item, another system that I put in place And this goes into my syllabus. And building a syllabus is important, right? And so when we have that grading system, the categories and weights, you can put that in your syllabus, and that's important to develop. Take some time, think about it, really develop one that aligns with what you value. And another thing that you can put in that syllabus is a makeup policy. And I will tell you that this is a system design insight that I've come across. I do not like the question, can I make this up? I missed class, can I make this up? And I don't like it because on a philosophical level, if someone misses a 2-hour class and they want to make up that class, it's going to be very difficult for them to do. It's impossible. There's no way that they could do one reading and make up that whole class, you know? And so you could have a policy where you have makeups and things like that. But for me, the other thing that I don't like is when I give a quiz and I'm done grading that quiz, and then 5 more people is like, oh, can I make it up? Can I make it up? And I just don't feel like it's very fair to the other learners who did their work and were ready for that quiz. Now, I understand someone might get sick or something like that, so we'll talk about some flexibility in a moment. But in general, I don't like that. And especially with my students, I wonder sometimes. Yes, some people get sick. Yes, some people have things to deal with. But I wonder sometimes. Like, there's also going to be people, some percentage, that are trying to take advantage of the system. And so what I've developed is a very strict no makeup policy. Now, hold your breath. We're going to get to this bit where I say, yes, there's going to be some flexibility and some grace for learners because, yes, people get sick, and yes, there's family emergencies, and yes, all of those things should be taken into account. So I say no makeups. And I say no late work except for homework that my learning management system can auto grade. That I will allow. But no makeups and no late work, anything that I have to do after the fact. Because once that loop is closed, it is going to stay closed, baby. It's going to stay closed. And so what I do instead of makeups is I have enough assignments in each category where I feel comfortable dropping the lowest scoring assignment. So let's say a student misses a day when we have an in-class essay, and they say, hey, can I make that up? Well, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, it's not fair. I know you probably were sick or something, but it's not fair that you get extra time while other students didn't get that extra time. And so, no, you can't make it up. No, sorry, you can't make that up. But the lowest scoring in-class essay will be dropped, and that's your flexibility in that category. Or let's say they miss 2 days. They miss an in-class essay, and they miss a lesson quiz, a chapter quiz or something. Okay, you missed that lesson quiz, and you missed that in-class essay, but the lowest scoring essay will be dropped. The lowest scoring quiz will be dropped. And that's my policy, and that's my internal mechanism as well. When somebody asks me if they can make something up, I say, no, but that's okay. It's not going to hurt your grade. And that's really my ideas. And my philosophy with that is I don't want to tank anybody's grade because they got sick. Or I don't want to tank anybody's grade because they had a family emergency and had to miss 2 days of class or something. This is really wonderful for me as well. Wonderful. I keep saying that word, wonderful. I'm Mr. Wonderful today. This creates a lot of flexibility because, for me as the teacher as well, because I don't have to do anything for that. Canvas, my learning management system, will automatically drop however many scores I tell it to drop in those categories. And so simply by being organized ahead of time with my learning management system, having those categories set up, built out ahead of time, and knowing which rules to add there to drop certain assignments, the lowest scoring 1 or lowest scoring 2, whatever the case. And so by doing that, you all of a sudden have a script that you can say to students anytime they want to make something up. You just say no, but the lowest scoring 1 is dropped. And I designed my class in such a way that a sample of their work is all I really need. And so 3 out of the 4 assignments, perfect. That's all I need to evaluate their proficiency level is 3 out of the 4. And I could probably do it with 2 out of the 4 if I wanted to. That feels a little bit crazy to me to drop 2 out of the 4 assignments. But you could do that on a case-by-case basis. a student comes to you and says, yeah, my grandmother passed away and I can't be there for a week because I'm going to be at the funeral. We're going to be out of town and all this stuff. That happens, right? And the life happens. And you want to be there and be flexible and be real with people and be there to support them in any way that you can. And so maybe you excuse another assignment, but the learning management system gives me that option. I can just type EX in the grade for that category, for that assignment, and it goes in as excused. And there's a bonus drop for that student. And I can be there in that way, and I still have enough to evaluate their proficiency level and their improvement throughout the quarter. So you can negotiate on a case-by-case basis still if you'd like. The general rule of no makeups and being strict with it. Don't immediately feel bad and say, oh, no, I can't do that. You've built in these drops on purpose. I have anyway, and that's the idea there. And that's what I love to do because it's fair for them. It's fair for me. I don't have to keep opening loops and reopening loops and reopening loops. And then on that case-by-case basis, I can, but it would be like 2 minutes, 2 minutes in a extenuating circumstances, Okay, so why is it that phase 1 matters? Well, if you do this properly, you're going to have a scope that is well-defined. It's limited and well-defined. Your materials, many of them are built ahead of time. And so when you come to class, you just open up those documents and you're off and running. Stories are chosen. Learning management system is configured. A calendar is clear. It's very, very, it's defined as well. But it's also got lots of flexibility for you. It's clear, but there's flexibility there. It's not overly defined. The grading policy is stable. The makeups are communicated clearly to students on the first day. That sort of a thing. And so those are some wonderful things everything's wonderful today. And the result of that is that you're mentally free during instruction. You're mentally free during instruction. And that's the key, right? If you're mentally free, then you can actually interact with learners and focus on what it is that you need to focus on when you're teaching. And you can focus on things like listening and reading and interaction and just being there with learners. And that's the goal of the first steps phase 1 of the CI Immersion system. In the next episode, which I'm not sure when it's going to be, since I am teaching and I'm doing a bunch of other things, I'm just going to coach my son's Little League this year, so that's going to be crazy. Adding more stuff to my plate, as it were. But the next phase is going to be the pre-story phase. That's phase 2. And we're going to cover things like high-frequency vocab, orbiting questions, comprehension checks, student-driven input, TPR, total physical response, moving from 0 to 1, getting learners from nothing to something, building that high-frequency vocab in a way that makes sense in the classroom. And this is where acquisition really starts. This is where it really starts. You'll start to see the payoff already from all the front loading that you did. And we move then into that pre-story phase, getting learners some high-frequency vocab that they can then use to start building stories. All right. Hey, if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or on YouTube. YouTube is getting kind of popular. I see some growth in that YouTube space. So that's cool. If you wouldn't mind telling people about it, taking a link to the show and sharing it. If you're on YouTube, share that show with your network or things like that. So the show will come sporadically as I get time to really focus on an episode and really give you a high quality, defined episode. But next episode will be on that pre-story phase. Thanks so much for listening. Muchas gracias y hasta la próxima.